This is a piece by a guy named Larry Taunton.
Larry who? Never heard of her.
What sort of a man is he?
Pick from Bama.
A man like any other, but more so.
Well, I thought he was dead.
This is the Larry Alex Taunton Show. Let's light this candle.
Good to be with you. This is Larry Alex Taunton. Welcome to the Larry Alex Taunton Show. It's great to be back in studio. I am sitting here with producer Matt enjoying some coffee and donuts. In fact, I had a donut that was sitting right here just a minute ago. And as viewers of this show will know, the combination of coffee and donuts, that is sugar, generally gets me going in the morning. And so you can be looking forward to a sugar-fueled a show today. I have been abroad. You have to be careful how you say that these days because that could be taken to mean some kind of transgender thing. I have been overseas for the last 3 months. I was in 7 countries. I was in Europe, 7 European countries, 3 months, and I was there to cover a variety of topics, some of which we'll touch on in the show today. But I went initially to cover the World Economic Forum. I also spent a little bit of time, so that's in Switzerland, in Davos, Switzerland. I was in Italy, of course, the Vatican, Romania, Poland, to take a look at the Ukraine war refugee situation there, France, Spain. I was all over the place, and we're going to touch on some of the issues that I got into on this particular trip. But I want to start today actually with maybe what might seem to be the conclusion of a show like this, and that is probably the most common question that I'm asked these days. I'll write an article, do a interview, do a podcast like this, and people will ask me, what can we do? You know, you've given us all this information, useful information, but what can we do? So I want to talk on the front end in the introduction of this show today about what you can do. And just remember the single word, engage. Begin engaging the culture. You will meet people that I will never meet. You will talk to people that I will never meet. You don't have to have a big platform. You don't have to be an Instagram influencer. You don't need to have a big following on Twitter or Facebook. In fact, honestly, if I didn't do what I do for a living, I wouldn't be on any of those platforms. I will admit that I hate social media. But you have loads of opportunities to just engage people over the backyard fence, at the water cooler, at the lunch table, at church. Unfortunately, these days, we have to be prepared to evangelize, to engage in our churches, picking up the kids at school, whatever the opportunity looks like for you, begin to engage. And let me give you some general principles for how to do that. Now, this is coming from someone who has debated some of the most famous intellectuals in the world, and people who are known as Molotov cocktail tossing atheists and the like. And there's a simple method that I use when talking to people, and it's something that I call the teapot principle. That's just my name. I just visualize a teapot. And in an era where people are conditioned, it's this kind of Pavlovian. You remember Pavlov? You ring the bell and the dog begins to salivate. These days, the bell is bringing up the kind of topics that are in the news daily. It's bringing up the Trump indictment. It's bringing up Trump. It's bringing up Christianity. It's bringing up, Joe Biden. It's bringing up Black Lives Matter or Antifa or riots or public education, any of those things. That's the bell. And the salivating in this case isn't salivate. Well, I guess it is. Maybe people start foaming at the mouth, but people begin to get very emotional. And they've been conditioned to react rather than to think logically. And my teapot principle is simply this. I envision a teapot in my head, and the conversation, as I sense that it's heating up and it's about to whistle, I take it off the stove. And then I change the subject. I bring up something, how about them Dodgers? Hey, did you see that movie last night? Hey, how are the kids doing? Tell me a little bit about your work. I take the opportunity to change the subject and to bring up something that's not so quite controversial, to engage at a very friendly level. And then when I think there's an opportunity to re-engage, I put the pot back on the stove and I begin to hammer away on that subject again. But conversations are intuitive, and for the Christian, I think often our intuition is really just the Holy Spirit speaking to us. I think we have to be very, very sensitive to that. And when I sense a conversation, a very wise man gave me this advice probably when I was about 15, and I've never forgotten it. He said, Larry, whenever I sense that a conversation is moving towards spiritual things, and that's where we want to take the conversation ultimately, just converting someone from being pro-abortion to pro-life doesn't get them, into heaven. There'll be plenty of pro-life people or Republicans in hell. We want to get people closer to the cross. And that doesn't mean those other issues don't matter. They do. And that might be a means of getting someone closer to the cross. But never lose sight of what your objective really is. And so I seek to engage people at a friendly level whenever I can. Not every conversation can be that. There are occasions, by the way, where you need to stomp people. We do have that model in Scripture. I mean, when David, stepped onto the field of battle, he wasn't out there to convert Goliath. He had a very, very different agenda there. When the Apostle Paul turned on Simon the sorcerer, it wasn't about conversion. So there are occasions where we're not so gentle. Jesus did turn over some tables, but whenever we get the opportunity that we want to be gentle. Peter has given us that as a general principle. It's not an absolute rule, but engaging with gentleness and respect is something that we want to do. And you have to understand, again, that those conversations are intuitive. And if you sense that you're talking to someone who is reasonable, someone with whom you can reason, that's a good thing. And try to engage with them on that level. And also just don't be a jerk. Understand that to have the attitude that only the person you're talking to is affected by propaganda and you aren't is arrogant. I mean, we're all influenced by media. We are all influenced by Hollywood movies and music and the things we just see. You can't insulate yourself from them. You just simply can't. You can't go and, unless you're going to go live in a desert alone, you're not going to escape them. And even then, you're going to take your sin nature with you. So endeavor to engage with people in that way, understanding that the goal is to get them closer to the cross. And I'm always hoping, I want to have humility in a conversation to recognize that I might be wrong on a given topic. People will sense that when they sense some humility on your part, because you see, I think of it as iron sharpening iron. If my argument is a poor argument, if what I'm believing is false, I want someone to punch holes in that. I don't want to go around spouting things that aren't true. So I give them the opportunity to do that. But you need to be prepared for conversational turbulence in these times. If you think that every conversation you're going to have with people isn't going to be infused with emotion, that's just not going to happen. And when you get bruised, and you will, that's okay. Just dust yourself off and go on to the next conversation. When somebody mistreats you, that's okay. But you want to be able to evaluate whether or not you were the person who caused that. But I always want to drive a conversation towards the cross, towards truth. So I really strongly encourage you to engage your friends and neighbors We're going to take a break here in just a moment. And when we come back, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the World Economic Forum in Davos, their annual meeting in Davos, which is where I was in January. And I want to tell you a little bit about what goes on at these meetings and what it is that these people believe, what it is that they hope to achieve globally. And I promise you, they have a major agenda. This is the Larry Alex Taunton Show.
This is the Larry Alex Taunton Show.
Larry is my favorite player.
Welcome back to the Larry Alex Taunton Show. I am Larry Alex Taunton. And, I just mentioned in the show opening that I have been in Europe for the last 3 months, 7 countries. And let's start with the beginning of that trip. By the way, just to give you a little bit of the philosophy that drives my work, most people in my line of work, that is to say writers, cultural commentators, they pontificate from, let's say, Atlanta, D.C., or New York, and from the comfort of some office, and they simply see the news and they react to it. Which isn't always a bad method, but I think if it's the only thing you do, it's a very bad method, because part of what I think is our major problem in this country right now is the fact that you're dealing with a lot of people. Let's say take somebody like AOC. I don't know if you saw this, but Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, turns out she's been using a burner account on did you see this? Did you see this? Yeah, she's been using a burner account on Twitter. Now, a burner account can be fun. Lots of people use them for, loads of reasons. But she's been using it to attack other people under a false identity. That's what we mean. In other words, she has her official Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez account, but then she has another one here that's called something like Zaza Demon. Demon. I mean, she owned it, didn't she? And she was attacking Matt Walsh. And in this, she basically was telling him she hoped he got killed by a trans activist, because he's taken a very strong stand. He's with Daily Wire. He's taken a very strong stand against, the transing of adolescents. And I applaud him for that and support him in that. We've been hitting that topic pretty hard. And so Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, rather than doing it through her official account, she went to her Zaza Demon account, where she began to attack him and then suggest she hoped he got assassinated. Now, I've received those kinds of threats, and they're almost always anonymous, as was the case here. But I think that one of the problems here is someone like an Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, and she might be an extreme example here. Maybe not the best example using AOC, but I wonder how much time she's ever spent in a red state. I mean, I wonder if she were to meet Matt Walsh's family, would she think these are all evil people? If she's reasonable, she would have to conclude that they are not. I think it's interesting that so many years ago, my friend, the late atheist journalist, Christopher Hitchens, began, with me, making swings through red states. This is recorded in my book, The Faith of Christopher Hitchens, named, I'm glad to say, Book of the Year. And I think Christopher decided that everything that he had been told about, quote unquote, flyover country, about this vast empty space in between, say, New York and LA, that there were actually some very nice and sensible people there, and he decided he liked them, and he wanted to, in some sense, champion them. This is the kind of political, social, I don't think religious, but a political and social conversion that Christopher was undergoing when he died of cancer. And my point being that the kind of work that I do, I endeavor to not just simply caricature the left. I've spent a fair amount of time in New York. I've spent a fair amount of time in Chicago. Excuse me. I'm getting over. I think I have the China virus. Don't worry, people. You can't get it. You can't get it through the. I'm joking. I'm joking. But I've spent a fair amount of time in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Rome, London, Moscow, Paris, Barcelona. The point being that I endeavor to understand the people that I'm writing about. I endeavor to understand something of their worldview. I endeavor to understand something of the issues that I'm addressing. When you hear me talking about Ukraine, it's because I've been in Ukraine no less than 7 times. I know something about what life is like there. My wife and I adopted a child from Ukraine. Many years ago, I wrote a book about Ukraine and its history, The Grace Effect. Many of you have read that particular book. So when I'm talking about that, I know something about it. When I'm talking about the Ukrainian war refugees, it's because I know something about them. And when I'm talking about the World Economic Forum, it isn't just because I'm sitting in DC or New York or Atlanta pontificating about it. It's because I was at the World Economic Forum's annual meeting. So the point being, it's important. Yeah, you're not, and unless you're a writer, you don't have to live that kind of life, but at least you should on the micro level. We were just talking in the previous segment about the importance of engaging your neighbors, sharing with them the truth, sharing with them the gospel. To the extent that you can, try to understand their perspective. Try to put yourself in their position so that you can understand what it is that they're feeling, what the questions are that they really have. Sometimes we can be very dismissive when we shouldn't be. There is a time to be dismissive, but it isn't all the time. And if you're able to do that, you're going to be better equipped to address the questions that they have, and you're going to be better equipped to discuss the issues at hand. So in this case, the World Economic Forum, which meets annually in Davos, and I have to tell you this is interesting. Davos is in the Alps, high in the Alps. It's an alpine ski resort. It's what you would find throughout the Alps. There are similar ski resorts, ski towns that you would find in, say, the Pyrenees. They dot the Pyrenees and the Alps and the Rockies, for that matter. But more so in Europe. There are a lot more of them in Europe, and Davos is one of them. So it's a very small town. I think it has a population of maybe 10,000, 15 tops. It's a very small place. So for someone like me to get there isn't easy. It's not an easy place to get to because it has a private airfield. Now, if you're Bill Gates and you're going, it's very simple. You board your private jet and you fly into the private airport. Let me tell you what they did. Now, these are the people who lecture me about your carbon footprint. They tell you need to be in a smart car. They tell you, okay, so producer Matt has looked it up for me. Yes, the population is about 11,000. So it's a small town. So they're there lecturing all of us on how we need to eat bugs. They do say this. We need to no longer eat beef. They tell us that we need to reduce our carbon footprint. And I'll get to this in a moment, you're the carbon they want to reduce, by the way. And they tell us that we shouldn't be driving gasoline engine cars. So what did they do? They flew into Davos, into the ski town, into their with their private jets, but they couldn't be bothered to then get into their big Mercedes or big BMWs or big Audis. I'm not talking about the starter version, for the kids. I'm talking about the big ones with the big engines, the big gasoline-driven engines. They couldn't be bothered to get into those at the airport and then go to Davos. No, what they did was they took helicopters from the airport to Davos, where they then transferred. And I took photos. You'll find these on my website and on my Twitter account. It's Larry Taunton, Taunton. At Larry Taunton is my Twitter handle, and I'm posting stuff there daily, articles basically, or what they call threads. And so this is this is what they are doing. So they're flying these helicopters into the city, and then I snapped some photos of these motorcades, of these huge, all of them black, by the way. You know, they look very governmental. In some cases they are. They're not all governmental. There were 50 heads of state that were there. There were 115 billionaires, more than 600 CEOs of major corporations, and then 2,700 people, other people who were there, people like me who are there to attend the forum, to attend the various sessions there. Now, 70% of the forum's presentations you can find online. In other words, the guy who wants to pontificate from New York, he can do it because 70% of the sessions are online. And so a lot of the media who are there, that's what they were doing, is they were in sessions listening to someone like, say, John Kerry or Klaus Schwab or, some other figure speaking. That isn't what I did because I knew those were going to be the headlines that you were going to get. Anyway, you didn't need me to cover that for you. Instead, what I did was this. Eric Metaxas says that I'm a spy. But what I did was I went, Davos is so small that there really isn't, there's really not much by way of coffee shops or restaurants. So I went into one of their few coffee shops, which has, I think there were 4 tables, maybe only 3, and each one had, say, 3 tables around it. They're quite small. No tables the size of this lovely table where I sit at the moment. They're all fairly small, and I made sure to sit there and not move. And during the breaks in the forum presentations, people would, pile into this coffee shop, and you have 3 or 4 tables, and you have maybe 50 people looking for a seat. So inevitably, someone would say, "Excuse me, can I sit at your table?" And I would say, "Well, yes, sure. Join me. Please sit down." Now, this relates to our show opening. You're talking about how do I engage? How do I talk to people? People love to talk about themselves. So if you're nervous, I tell my wife this all the time. My wife isn't shy. My wife is reserved. Lori's quite reserved. And if we're at some big soiree, I always tell her, just ask people questions about themselves. You'll have to say almost nothing if you ask them what they do or about their family or the important. People love to tell you about themselves. And at a place like Davos, they love to tell you why they're important. They just can't resist telling you why they're important. So all I did was just sit there pretending to be another Weffer. And by the way, that's what they say. They don't say World Economic Forum or WEF. They say Weffff. that F, feels like it's dragged out. The Weffff. They'll say, "So why are you here at the Weffff? Are you a Weffff member?" This kind of thing. So if you want to really sound like you're in the know, say Weffff. And I'll say Weffff throughout the rest of this show. So as I'm sitting there, these people join me, and I just ask questions. So tell me about yourself. And they all want to tell you their significance, with whom they're associated there. So, one woman tells me that she's a translator for a head of state, and she's, she just can't wait to tell me that. And then there's someone else who tells me that they're in charge of this head of state's bodyguards. And but some of the more interesting conversations I had went something like this. And I want to be careful here because I don't want to reveal who the individuals were with whom I was talking. And by the way, here's this cracks me up because most of these people, and I don't want to say that they're all like this, but most of them they're really a bit full of themselves. And the result is that they never ask you anything about yourself. They never do. So it was easy for me. And by the way, I have a very stock answer. If I say that I'm a writer, then people get nervous. If I say I'm an author in this kind of setting, they get nervous, wondering what I might be doing there. So I just say I'm the head of a nonprofit. no one ever asks you any more questions after you say you're the head of a nonprofit. And that's true. At Fixed Point Foundation, I am the executive director of the Fixed Point Foundation, which is a nonprofit. But that sounds so bland, so boring. No one ever follows up. They're like, oh. But I never had to use it because no one asked, because they want to talk about themselves. A couple of the conversations that were particularly fascinating. The first was with a guy that I will characterize as sort of a higher up. You see, some of the people who are at the World Economic Forum, they are there to sell stuff to other attendees, particularly heads of state. So they are there to push a product. And they're Mr. Networker guy. We've all met Mr. Networker guy. He's ready to give you his business card. He's ready to tell you about the product that he's there selling. And then there are other people there who are presenters. In addition to the major sessions, you also have smaller breakout sessions that are going on at the same time. These that fall into that 30% category. I said 70% of the Weffff is online. This is the 30% category that isn't online. But I would argue is every bit as important, maybe more important, because these aren't the marquee names, but they're marquee influencers in a kind of sinister way. So one guy that I'm talking to who, probably my age, he's probably in his 50s. He is telling me about the Weffff, and he's using all the language of the Weffff. I think this year the theme was, oh gosh, it always sounds very, innocuous and friendly. It's something like finding unity in a broken world. It's something like that. And so it sounds innocuous. It sounds positive. It sounds like these are people who are out to change the world for good. And in some cases, they really do believe that's what they're doing. That's what makes them frightening. C.S. Lewis said that the worst kind of tyranny is that tyranny which is exercised for your own good. And it's because those people tyrannize you with a clear conscience. They're of the view that what they're doing to you is the right thing to do. And here we have it. This year it was called, the theme was cooperation in a fragmented world. I mean, what sounds more harmless than that? But as I'm talking to this guy, and again, I'm referring to the higher ups. There are young people there, and those people are full of idealism, and they're being weaponized by the Weffff. But I'll get to them in just a moment. The higher ups don't really believe that language. They know better. They're more jaded by the world. They're more realistic. Most of them are exceptionally wealthy. They've traveled extensively. They're not stupid. And so I'm talking to this guy, and he begins by using, all the language of the Weffff as he, would expect. He's supposed to. Everyone's expected to talk like that. So I decided to push back at him just a little bit. And I said, well, allow me to play devil's advocate for just a moment. What do you think of the Weff's goal of reducing global population? He gets this very smug look on his face as he begins to explain to me like he's explaining to a child. I could almost feel him reaching across the table and patting me on the head as he explained the problems with population. Now, this all sounded very impersonal. It was like we were talking batting averages. We were just talking statistics. And here he is saying that, well, you have to understand, the Earth is exceeding its carrying capacity, and there needs to be some sort of joint resolution. We must come to agreement about how we go about reducing the global population. It's for the betterment of humanity, all couched in this kind of terms. But at the end of the day, of course, what he's really talking about is killing people. He never used that language. He didn't use the word abortion. He spoke of it, again, as though we were sitting and talking about batting averages. This is the way, this is the way the left has always been. I recall William L. Shire's book the rise and fall of the Third Reich, in which he talks about the various interrogations of those people who were at the Wannsee conference, where the final solution, Wannsee is just outside of Berlin. I guess now it's very much a part of Berlin, but at the time it was semi-rural. And the Wannsee conference that was held there in, I think, 1941. And the decision was made to eliminate the Jews of Europe. And the language they used, just sounded as harmless as can be. We're about to take a break. This is the Larry Alex Taunton Show. When we come back, we're going to continue our discussion about the World Economic Forum. This show, this ministry, is supported by viewers like you. And if you appreciate my work, if you think that what we do at Fixed Point Foundation, if you think that what we do on the Larry Alex Taunton Show is helpful to you, please help us. You can make a fully tax-deductible contribution and help us pay for all that it takes, pay for Matt's salary and pay for me being here and for the production of this show. Thank you very much for your viewership and for watching. Welcome back to the Larry Alex Taunton Show. I am Larry Alex Taunton. And before we went to break, we were talking about the World Economic Forum, the Weffff. Did you get that? The Weffff, as they say. That's how the insiders all say it. And I was talking about a conversation with, one of the older attendees at the World Economic Forum. They are not idealistic. They don't buy into a lot of the rhetoric. They know better. But here's this gentleman telling me about the need to reduce the global population. Now, I want to be clear. As Metaxas said, it's like I'm a spy there. They think I'm a Weffer as well. I never revealed who I was and what I was really doing. I'm just sitting and listening to their conversation. But yeah, here he is telling me, and as though again we're sitting and we're talking sports, we're talking batting averages, and he's using statistics to explain why more people on the earth need to disappear, die. But he just didn't use that kind of language. William L. Shire, says the same thing about the Wannsee conference. About I have read, by the way, the interrogations of some of the major Nazi war criminals, Rudolf Hess, who was not to be confused with Hitler's associate, but the head of the Auschwitz concentration camp. When you read what he has to say, it's interesting. Unless the interrogator really puts the thumbscrews to him, they didn't literally use thumbscrews. I want to be clear. It's not Abu Ghraib. They didn't do that. They when they really put pressure on him, then they could get him to speak more clearly. But for the most part, he was just talking in language that was impersonal. It didn't sound like, the killing of people. But of course, that's what he was talking about, was the extermination of European Jews and Gypsies and Slavs and Christians and so forth. So it is when you're talking to the World Economic Forum. Now, if you think that I'm making this up, if you think that this is all stuff that is some sort of conspiracy theory, I would simply say to you, go to YouTube and look up Dr. Dennis Meadows. Now, I've posted this on my Twitter page many times. You can find his full talks online, but the one you're looking for is one where he's seated. He's not standing in front of a lectern. He's seated. And it's about a 2-minute and 13-second clip, something like that. If you can find the full interview. I'm so grateful for the people who interviewed him, because all they did was ask him a question and then sit back and let him speak. They just let him speak. And the guy says the most outrageous things. And he's intelligent, looks like a guy that you would probably could enjoy having a nice cup of coffee with, civilized. And yet he's saying we need to reduce the global population from 8 billion, roughly, to less than 2 billion. So we only need to get rid of about 6 billion people. Now, I want to say that on the other end of this, if you pay attention to Elon Musk at all, Elon Musk is going absolutely the opposite direction. Musk is saying we're looking at a global population collapse. that all of the Earth's population would fit inside New York City. You know, it's something like that. It's like if they're in so many stories of buildings, they would fit inside a fairly small space. Let's just say the whole state of New York. But the point being that they're wrong. But this is the push that's being made. And I talk about this also. You can find a series of articles that I've written about the World Economic Forum on my website at LarryAlexTaunton.com. That's LarryAlexTaunton, Taunton.com. And look for a series that I've called The Great Jet Set. The Great Jet Set. It's a 4-part series that I wrote for the Daily Wire. And after it had been over there for a little while, I've republished it on my own website because it's behind a paywall over there. So you don't have to go and subscribe in order to get it. Don't tell anybody I told you that, but you can go get it on my own website, The Great Jet Set. It's a 4-part series about, what a bit of data that I put up here. Whole population, the Earth's population would fit in Texas in single-family homes. So, there's a great exaggeration here. But of course, these are individuals who are not volunteering themselves. You see, just as they think they're an exception on the carbon footprint issue, they can fly their jets, they can fly their helicopters, they can do whatever they want to. Bill Gates basically said that in an interview fairly recently. They don't think you should be able to do that. And when they're talking about reducing the global population, they don't mean themselves. They mean you. They want you to die. They want to reduce. You are the carbon they want to reduce. So this is the reality. So I'm sitting and talking with this guy, and it's a creepy conversation as he is explaining to me, like he's talking to a child, why we need to reduce the Earth's global population. Now, it was hard for me, if I was to maintain my spy status at Davos, not to push back, but I thought it'd be too revelatory of my own thinking if I were to say much. Instead, I just sat there and I listened and thoughtfully and, gave the occasional grunt. Yes, interesting. Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for explaining that. Now, let's go to the other end of the spectrum and talk about youth. Because there are a lot of youth there. And this is the kind of thing that you would not know if you didn't go to the World Economic Forum. So again, while every news agency that I know of, they were focused on the big plenary sessions at the World Economic Forum, the stuff you can just watch online or you can watch later. That isn't what I did. I was milling about among the 2,700 attendees. Wasn't hanging with the billionaires. I wasn't hanging with the heads of state. That's the stuff you're all going to get from the news. I instead was mixing among those 2,700 attendees. I wanted to know, who are the kind of people who come to something like this? And what I discovered is they have something they call the WEYF. It's the World Economic Youth Forum. Now, I don't know how they spit that one out. I don't know that one rolls off the Weffff you can do. Weffff is maybe the way they do that one. But they have the World Economic Youth Forum. And these, unlike the guy that I was just describing to you, who is a little jaded by the war, he's not carrying around the Weffff swag. He doesn't have the Weffff backpack or the Weffff briefcase or the Weffff t-shirt or the Weffff hat. Those people aren't doing any of that. It's the youth who are doing it. And in some cases, some very idealistic, say, like I bumped into a young woman who was from Atlanta. And, she's got some of that stuff, going on. And she's, extremely idealistic and in my opinion, needs to get out a little bit more. By the way, attendance to the World Economic Forum, like the full thing, is $52,000. That's another reason, by the way, that I did not attend the plenary sessions. $52,000. I don't know. Maybe they'd have given me a media badge, but I doubt it very seriously because they would very quickly identify. I'm quite Googleable. As one young woman said to me, "Oh, you're Googleable." And not favorably, by the way. Google does not like me, so they make sure that every return you get is not a positive one. You have to go for several pages. But anyway, it's not cheap. But as somebody whose work has focused a lot with young people. In fact, I told Lori, we were watching the championship game, the Final Four of the NCAA tournament. And it dawned on me, I'd forgotten this. I told you I've had a pretty severe bump on the head, so sometimes I forget things. But it dawned on me as I'm watching UConn win the championship. I recall speaking at UConn some years ago and engaging with the young people at that university. The World Economic Forum is producing an army of Greta Thunbergs. That's their goal in every single area of life. They are radicalizing youth. And in case you don't really know much about Marxism and Marxist tactics, young people have always been used as the shock troops. They're just cannon fodder. They don't care about these people. They want them to disrupt. They want them to agitate. They want them to cause problems. They're the people that are idealistic, that are blocking roads in say, France or in Britain, who are sitting and arms linked and saying we're not going to let the cars by until there's some kind of legislation is passed or until we get what we want. They're the individuals, by the way, in New York who are paid agitators who are outside of the courthouse in New York as Trump is being indicted. They're the individuals who are some of them are paid agitators who on January 6th were mixed among the crowd. But the people at the young people at the World Economic Forum, the World Economic Youth Forum members, honestly, I felt sorry for them. And I did because they don't realize they're being used. You see them walking around. I saw a couple of hats that said global citizen. There is no more ridiculous phrase than that. That's the kind of thing you can wear at Davos and maybe in France and maybe in Germany and maybe in Britain, in the Western world and get away with it, maybe even get a pat on the back. Try wearing that in Saudi Arabia. Try wearing that in Nigeria, anywhere Africa. Try wearing that in Vietnam. I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all. Not at all. I mean, the jihadis will be laughing as they're stringing you up, by your ankles. Global citizen, there is no such thing. But this, of course, is part of their objective to create that. So they're wearing all this swag and they're completely bought in to the ideology that's being sold to them. And it's not just simply an anti-American or anti-Western philosophy. It's an anti-human philosophy because the language they use isn't typically for the good of humanity. Do you know what it is? It's for the good of the planet. It's for the good of the planet. And that's dangerous language. If you think about that, it's self-revelatory. It indicates to you what they think about humanity. And that is not much because they've taken a Darwinian worldview all the way, an atheistic worldview, all the way to its logical conclusion. You see, we as Christians believe that man is an object of special creation. He's set apart. He has a soul. He's made in the image of God. We are all image bearers. But see, once you suppress, as Romans 1 says, once you suppress the knowledge of God, once you suppress the truth of God, you eventually pervert the truth and you pervert life itself. I'm mindful of something that Thomas Aquinas said, and I'm paraphrasing him here, and that is this, that God made angels all spirit, no flesh. He made animals all flesh, no spirit. He made man a composite of both flesh and spirit. And so the result is that man can he has a choice. He can ascend to the higher, that is to say, to the spiritual, or he can descend to the lower, which is the animal. And that's the direction we're going right now. We're going in the direction of the animal, of the beast. That's the direction we're going. We're seeing it in the breakdown of civilization throughout the Western world, as people are throwing off civility, as they're throwing off their own humanity. And I mean quite literally, when you have children being taught to rebel against the way that God created them and to embrace instead the view that they are whatever they want to be. If you're a male, you can throw that off and say, no, I'm a female. And everyone else is expected to embrace your fantasy. Or if you're a biological female, you can throw that off and say, no, I'm a man. And everyone, again, is expected to embrace, to enter into, and to support your delusions. This is a rebellion against creation. It's a rebellion against God. I was talking to an Irish school teacher when I was in Rome, sitting next to me at a table in a restaurant, and she was telling me that she has a little boy in her classroom in Belfast, or maybe it was Dublin, regardless, in Ireland, that self-identifies as a wolf, and she, as a teacher, is not allowed to tell him he's not a wolf. How broken is our educational system? How broken are we as a people when you're not allowed to tell people the truth anymore? That's another topic for another day. But if your children are in government schools, please get them out. Your children are being radicalized against you, even in some of the best case scenarios. Maybe they're not doing that nonsense, but still, their education is coming from a godless point of view. Scripture tells us that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. If that is not the basic assumption of the educational system that your children are in, get them out. Get them out. Your children will be radicalized against you. Anyway, when we're talking the World Economic Forum, we're now in sort of post-Christian thought. We've been beating this drum for quite a while. Those of you who have followed my work for more than a decade will know that we were among the first, maybe the first, to take on the major atheists, what was then called the New Atheism, which hit the scene roughly about 2005, 2006 with a series of bestsellers from the so-called Four Horsemen of the Counter-Apocalypse: Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, and Daniel Dennett. I've debated publicly or privately 3 of that group. I never have Sam Harris. He would not engage in debate. John Lennox may have debated all 4 of them. I'm not sure. I have to think about Harris, because I know that we tried Harris and Harris wouldn't do it, but maybe he later relented in some other venue. But I debated, you can find this on our YouTube page. In fact, Matt was just pointing out to me that it's actually the very first video that comes up, my debate with Christopher Hitchens, public debate in Billings, Montana. I debated Daniel Dennett on Al Jazeera and a global audience of about 270 million people, along with, by the way, they added a Muslim cleric at the last second. Dan and I thought that was a little odd. We were both told we're coming to debate each other, and then the last second they said, oh, by the way, we have a Muslim cleric who'd like to join the debate. And we thought, this is a setup. This is a setup. Almost sounds, by the way, like a joke. A Christian, an atheist, and a Muslim walk into Al Jazeera in New York. I mean, that sounds like the setup for a joke. And Richard Dawkins, I have engaged many times privately to this very day. Dawkins, by the way, has been saying a lot of things publicly as of late that I very much appreciate. One of which has been that you cannot rebel against your biological sex. You are what you are. I appreciate him saying that. But the fact is that the World Economic Forum just assumes that there is no God. This is the way they roll. It's just as assumed there is no God, and so might makes right. These individuals who are running the World Economic Forum, like Klaus Schwab and these heads of state and these CEOs and these billionaires, they see themselves as masters of the universe who can more or less do whatever they want. They're individuals like Bill Gates. And that alone is interesting. But the youth at the World Economic Forum, it distresses me to see so many young people who have bought into this nonsense and who don't realize, Psalm 127 says that children are like arrows in the hands of a warrior. You know, when we were raising our children, all our children are now grown, all 4 of them. But that imagery stuck in my mind is that I am sharpening them like arrows. And one day I pull them from the quiver and we aim them at a wicked world, and we send them into that world to make a difference for Jesus Christ. And I'm so proud to say that all of them, they're all sinners. They're all fallen. They're flawed people, but they are also wonderful people who are doing great things for the kingdom. I'm proud of all of them. They stand firm in their faith. But you see, the opposite is also true. There are those individuals who are sharpening children like arrows in the hands of a warrior for a wicked cause. And they aim the Greta Thunbergs at the world, and they fire them off into the world in order to spread nonsense, propaganda, earth worship. And that, by the way, brings us back to Romans chapter 1, because Romans 1 says that part of the suppression of truth, part of the perversion of truth, is the worship of nature. They begin worshiping birds and animals and creeping things. This is what Romans 1 tells us. This is all very true. We're about to take a break here, and when we come back, we'll continue our discussion of the World Economic Forum. This is the Larry Alex Taunton Show.
This is the Larry Alex Taunton Show.
Welcome back to the Larry Alex Taunton Show. You know, we're talking pretty heavy stuff, but I want to say something for fun here. This back here, this right here is, I am a hat guy. I don't know how many of you are hat people, but this was one of my favorite hats. I bought this hat in France. It's not particularly expensive. This is what's called a Panama hat, and I loved this hat. And I wore this hat in, I think, about 40 countries, and I even took pictures of it before I left on that particular journey. That was for writing the book, which I have sitting over here, Around the World in More Than 80 Days. And my whole life, I've just been, in fact, my mom says that one of my favorite books as a small child was Old Hat, New Hat, Dr. Seuss. So this hat here, it has holes in it. It's like I had got arrows in it in Africa, or whatever. And now I just keep it for sentimental value. So when I was in when I was in Italy, when I was in Rome, I bought a new one. This is a new Panama. And this is a Borsalino. Now, Borsalino, this is a much more expensive hat than that one. Borsalinos they're just wonderful, wonderful Italian hats. And so I bought another one, while I was there to replace my others. But I'm like Imelda Marcos. Imelda Marcos was famous for her shoes. I am the Imelda Marcos of hats. I am the Imelda Marcos of hats. But see, the problem with these is you would think, well, look at that. It barely fits me anymore. And you say, what, did my head grow? Well, maybe. But it's because your sweat causes a straw hat to, contract. It gets much smaller. So you have to have a hat stretcher, which while it's wet, when you take it off, and you really don't want to get a Panama hat wet, they're not good they don't respond well to rain. But I mean, you're going to be sweaty. And so you got to put the hat stretcher in there, and you have to stretch it back out and let it dry, because otherwise, when you put it on, it's going to sit on your head just the way that one did. But here's my latest. I love this hat. This new Borsalino here. Anyway, so moving on from Borsalinos to the World Economic Forum, and I prefer honestly to be talking about Borsalinos than the World Economic Forum, because the Weffers are crazy. And by this, I mean not necessarily clinically nuts. Rather, I mean that what we're seeing, part of what we're seeing taking place in the world, ladies and gentlemen, I keep making reference to Romans chapter 1. I've written an article on my website on Romans chapter 1. In fact, we did a podcast. We did a whole show on Romans chapter 1, which you can find on YouTube and on Rumble. And, we always have stuff over on Rumble, just so you know. Rumble is, you won't see that there's hardly any views on anything over on Rumble. But the reason we do that is we're always housing things over on Rumble for when we get kicked off of YouTube, because we're pretty sure that will eventually happen. It has certainly happened to others. There's no reason for us to think that it won't eventually happen to us. So we're always staging it in two areas. But most of our views probably are coming over on YouTube, not including TV. The broadcast on NRB TV, has a very nice viewership. So maybe the primary viewership is there. I don't know. I don't really count it, and I don't look at the analytics. I don't worry too much about that. But suffice it to say that these are individuals that are crazy in the Romans 1 sense, meaning that once you suppress the knowledge of God, once you suppress the truth, you will begin to embrace all kinds of craziness. You will come to the conclusion that those things that are unnatural can be natural. So that is to say, you'll come to the conclusion that a man can be a woman and a woman can be a man. You'll come to the conclusion that parents aren't important. You'll come to the conclusion that there is no absolute truth. You'll come to the conclusion that human beings have no ultimate value. You will come to the conclusion there is no life after death. You will embrace the absurd. And that is where we are, where you're looking at headlines that you think, am I looking at the Babylon Bee? Is this the Onion? I mean, where you're looking at things that are so absurd, that are so nuts. And that's where we are. So here, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about the World Economic Forum. I just want you to understand that these are individuals that mean to do you harm. And to that extent, the question is asked, what can I do? Well, I told you on the front end of this episode to engage the culture. Just engage the people in your world. That's what they're doing, by the way. They're sending their equivalent of missionaries into the world to make converts on everything from the environment to God. That's what they're doing. That's what we need to do. We have to get back to the basics. We have to fulfill the Great Commission. We find ourselves here in large part because we haven't been fulfilling the Great Commission. So you need to get back to that. But I would also urge you to engage not just at the grassroots level, but to engage your congressmen. Engage your representatives. They need to represent you. And unfortunately, a very high number of them feel that they have no accountability whatsoever and they can do whatever they want. We still, here in the United States, we still have a representative republic, and we need to make it very clear to our representatives that when they are not representing the will of the people, but are instead reflecting the views of the World Economic Forum or some kind of radical leftist agenda, we need to make it very clear there will be consequences for that. Reba McEntire, of all people, yesterday, I saw that she was, basically saying drag shows for children are just simply not a big deal. Need to be consequences for that. She might be a very nice person. Don't buy her records. Bud Light with their crazy, we're talking NRB here, so maybe none of these people out here actually drink beer. I don't know. But if you do, if you're Baptist, you're not supposed to be. But if we have any Anglican, Episcopalian viewers here, don't drink that stuff. Go and get something else, because here they are pushing this trans agenda. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to encourage you as I close this particular show. We serve an awesome God who said, let there be light. And in the end, we win. In the end, we win. So do not lose heart. This has been the Larry Alex Taunton Show.
Turn out the lights. The party's over. They say that all.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are grateful for the standing ovation, but there will be no encore for today's performance. Please exit the building in an orderly fashion. Thank you.
Honey, can we leave now?